I didn't wake up that morning expecting to become a cautionary tale, a legend, and a training example all at once. Mostly, I woke up hoping the station coffee machine would stop tasting like regret filtered through plastic. When you live on a multi-species trade hub built by committee, your expectations stay low for survival reasons. You don't dream big. You dream functional. Oxygen that doesn't hum ominously. Gravity that doesn't stutter. Doors that only lock when you ask them to. The station itself was quiet in that polite, unsettling way only non-humans can pull off. Corridors wide enough for 6 different body plans, padded walls to absorb claws, mandibles, or emotional outbursts. Most species here communicated in subtle ways: color shifts, pheromone pulses, tasteful silences that lasted minutes. Humans, by comparison, were considered conversational riots. We gestured too much. We smiled too hard. We laughed at the wrong volume. The station manual actually suggested humans take emotional pacing breaks. That reputation followed me when she smiled at me. It wasn't a shy smile or a predatory one. It was bright, confident, and deliberate, like she just decided something important and was pleased with herself for it. Her species had facial muscles that moved in ways mine couldn't fully interpret, but the universal translator helpfully chimed in with a soft confirmation tone: positive intent, friendly interest, elevated curiosity. Nothing dangerous. Probably. She asked if I'd be willing to participate in a private cultural exchange. Now, on paper, that phrase means everything and nothing. On this station, it could involve food sampling, synchronized breathing, comparative humor analysis, or sitting quietly while someone hums at you for 40 minutes. I'd already been part of a cultural exchange where I had to maintain eye contact with a being that didn't believe in blinking, so my standards were flexible. I agreed. She led the way to a small multipurpose room, the kind meant for interviews or meditation or, if you believe the posted sign, conflict resolution. The doors slid shut behind us with a soft, final sound. Then it locked. Not aggressively. Not ominously. Just a calm, confident click, like it knew something I didn't. I joked about fire regulations. She laughed, a melodic sound that made the translator glow faintly, as if pleased. She explained that privacy was important in her culture when sharing authentic emotional states. Observers could influence the outcome. I nodded because that made sense in a general, academic way, even if my human brain was already inventing unnecessary scenarios. The room itself was simple. Neutral lighting. Temperature adjusted automatically to the average comfort range of all registered species inside, which meant I was slightly cold, and she was apparently thrilled. We sat. We talked. At first, it was normal. Background histories. Travel anecdotes. Her species' fascination with human expressiveness. My species' inability to stop explaining things even when no one asked. Then the translator hiccuped. It was barely noticeable at first. A flicker of text in my peripheral display, correcting itself too quickly to read. A delay between her sounds and my understanding. I assumed it was station lag. Everything on the station lagged eventually. Even time, if you listen to the physicists complain. She asked me how humans expressed admiration. I shrugged and said it depended. Words, mostly. Sometimes laughter. Sometimes making complete fools of ourselves in front of people we liked and hoping confidence would grow back later. She tilted her head, fascinated. In her culture, admiration was expressed emotionally. Fully. Without restraint. Suppressing it was considered dishonest, even rude. Emotional responses were meant to be shared so the other party could truly understand the impact they were having. That's when the translator decided to be helpful. Instead of translating words, it began translating emotional intensity. Tone. Volume. Physiological reactions. All neatly categorized and, apparently, routed through the station's public address system. The first broadcast was mild. A gentle chime echoed through nearby corridors, followed by a calm, synthesized voice announcing something about elevated emotional engagement detected in a private room. I froze. She looked delighted. She explained that this was normal. Her people valued transparency. Emotional data was often shared in communal spaces to foster trust. I opened my mouth to object, then hesitated, because the translator helpfully labeled my reaction as nervous anticipation, which sounded far more dramatic than I felt. The door did not unlock when I asked it to. It did, however, cheerfully inform me that the room was in privacy mode and that external interruptions were restricted. Somewhere outside, footsteps slowed. Conversations paused. I imagined dozens of alien heads tilting in unison as the station politely amplified something that should never have left the room. I tried to lower my voice. The translator raised it. I tried to laugh it off. The translator classified it as high-spirited affirmation. She, meanwhile, was participating enthusiastically, offering what her culture considered generous emotional feedback. The translator rendered each response with clinical enthusiasm, announcing things about human reactions that sounded like test results. I became acutely aware of the station's legendary acoustics. Through the walls, through the vents, through every public speaker designed for emergencies and announcements, our cultural exchange was being summarized in real time. Not in words I'd chosen. In interpretations I didn't agree with. Each emotional spike was labeled, projected, and politely shared with anyone within 3 decks. I could practically hear reputations being rewritten. Somewhere, a security officer cleared their throat. Somewhere else, a scientist stopped taking notes and started taking more notes. The station, so accustomed to whispers and subtle signals, was suddenly awash in translated human reactions it was not prepared for. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that this was only the beginning. Once you notice that an entire space station has gone quiet to listen to you, it's very hard to unnotice it. The silence wasn't complete, of course. There were still environmental hums, distant footfalls, the polite whir of life support systems doing their thankless jobs. But the conversational noise, the low murmur of dozens of species minding their own business, had dropped away like someone hit a mute button on reality. The translator did not mute. It adjusted. A new tone slipped into the announcements, smoother and more confident, as if it had finally decided what it was meant to be doing with its life. Instead of struggling to find equivalent words, it leaned fully into emotional interpretation. Every reaction, every shift in posture, every involuntary human sound was now processed, categorized, and broadcast with cheerful professionalism. I swallowed. The translator informed the station that the human participant was exhibiting anticipatory resilience. I did not know what that meant, but it sounded impressive and alarming in equal measure. I tried to speak slowly, carefully, enunciating every syllable like I was addressing a malfunctioning child. I explained that humans usually preferred to keep certain reactions private. The translator condensed this into a helpful summary about modesty instincts clashing with high emotional output, which did nothing to reduce the interest of anyone listening. Outside the room, movement resumed, but differently. Not people passing by with purpose. People lingering. Pausing. Pretending to check wall panels that had not required inspection in years. A cleaning drone hovered nearby for far too long, its sensors angled suspiciously toward our door. Inside, she was having the time of her life. From her perspective, this was going beautifully. A successful exchange. Honest reactions. Rich data. She offered encouragement the way her people did, openly, enthusiastically, with sounds and expressions meant to affirm bravery and participation. Each one hit the translator like fuel on a fire. The station announcements grew more specific. The system began praising human endurance, commending adaptability, noting structural integrity maintenance under elevated emotional stimulus. That last one echoed down the corridor with a reverent hush, like a holy phrase. I felt my face heating up, which the translator interpreted as heightened engagement. I waved my hands, trying to signal for her to stop. She misunderstood the gesture as excitement, and responded in kind. The translator rewarded us with a longer broadcast, complete with tonal analysis and confidence ratings. Somewhere above us, A public display screen flickered to life, automatically pulling up the translated feed. I knew this because the translator helpfully announced that visual accompaniment had been enabled to enhance communal understanding. I did not look at the screen. I did not want to know what it thought it was showing. Voices began to filter through the door. Not loud. Not intrusive. Just quiet, stunned whispers in half a dozen languages. A security channel crackled to life, its audio accidentally routed through the same system. Someone asked, very calmly, whether this was a containment breach or a ritual. Another voice responded that it appeared to be a human. That answer seemed to satisfy them. I attempted to laugh again, aiming for casual dismissal. The translator described it as confidence display masking overwhelming output. I stopped laughing immediately, which was recorded as controlled restraint. None of this helped. The rumors didn't need words. You could feel them spreading, hopping species boundaries at record speed. A human locked in a private room, generating emotional readings strong enough to override default station filters. A non-human participant responding enthusiastically. No distress signals. No requests for assistance. Just intensity. To a station full of species that prided themselves on emotional economy, this was like watching someone juggle plasma grenades while smiling politely. I tried the door again. It refused me with the same calm confidence as before, reminding me that the exchange was still in progress and that early termination might be considered discourteous. She nodded approvingly at the door's judgment. She explained gently that backing out now would imply dissatisfaction. In her culture, that would be deeply embarrassing. I stared at her, weighing my options. Public humiliation now versus interspecies incident later. The translator sensed my hesitation and announced, "Human demonstrates strategic endurance." That phrase did something terrible. It shifted the tone outside. What had been curiosity turned into respect. The whispers changed pitch. Someone gasped softly. A low, impressed trill echoed from farther down the corridor. The security channel went silent, replaced by the sound of someone hurriedly pulling up reference materials. I realized, dimly, that the station wasn't laughing. They were taking notes. The translator began issuing comparative analysis, drawing on archived data from previous human interactions. It highlighted how humans vocalized emotional states more intensely than average, but also recovered quickly. It speculated, out loud, that this trait might make humans uniquely suited for high-stress bonding scenarios. I wanted to crawl into a maintenance hatch and live out the rest of my days as a caution sign. She, meanwhile, leaned closer, lowering her voice in what she clearly believed was a considerate gesture. The translator amplified it anyway, describing her tone as encouraging affirmation. She thanked me for my openness, complimented my honesty, praised my willingness to engage without suppressing natural reactions. Every compliment landed on the station like a medal being pinned where I couldn't remove it. A group of bystanders began clapping. Not loudly. Respectfully. The kind of applause reserved for academic presentations or courageous volunteers. I heard someone whisper that humans were even more impressive than the rumors suggested. I had not known there were rumors. The translator, sensing a peak in communal interest, helpfully announced that the exchange was entering a highly successful phase. It projected estimated compatibility scores and emotional resonance metrics that I did not understand and did not want associated with my name. I tried one last time to protest, to explain that this was a misunderstanding, that humans were not, whatever this was making us out to be. The translator summarized my speech as humble deflection common in resilient species. The door remained locked. Outside, the station leaned in. And somewhere in the system logs, a note was being added that would follow me for the rest of my career. By the time the station's security override finally cut through the translator's enthusiasm, the damage had already reached the point of no return. There was a soft chime, the kind reserved for administrative decisions, and the door made a noise I had never been so relieved to hear in my life. It unlocked. It didn't fly open. It slid aside with maddening dignity, revealing a corridor packed with beings pretending very badly that they hadn't been listening to every emotionally annotated second of my existence for the last several minutes. There were security officers, their posture halfway between alert and apologetic. There were researchers holding tablets already full of notes. There were passers-by who had absolutely not been passing by for quite some time. And towering over all of them on a nearby display was the translator's summary feed, scrolling calmly through highlighted phrases like a proud parent showing off a child's report card. Human participant demonstrated exceptional emotional resilience. Vocal expressiveness exceeds baseline by significant margin. Structural integrity maintained under sustained stimulus. I stared at the screen in horror. Someone behind me made a soft, impressed noise. The alien girl stepped forward beside me, completely unbothered, her posture relaxed and satisfied. She looked out at the crowd and inclined her head slightly, a gesture that translated as polite acknowledgement. The translator, still very much online, announced that the exchange had concluded successfully, and thanked the station for its attention. That was when the questions started. They came carefully at first. A security officer asked whether I had been under duress. The translator evaluated my expression and announced that I appeared fatigued but fulfilled, which was absolutely not the phrasing I would have chosen. A medical technician inquired whether humans required recovery periods after intense emotional output. The translator chimed in with statistics pulled from outdated human studies and a few very unhelpful reality shows. I tried to speak for myself. I really did. I opened my mouth to explain that none of this was what it looked like, that humans weren't some kind of unstoppable emotional juggernauts, that this was just a misunderstanding compounded by a very broken piece of software. The translator condensed my explanation into a neat bullet point about modest minimization common in high-capacity species. The alien girl watched me with open admiration. She clarified, helpfully, that my reactions had been exemplary. In her culture, she explained, emotional transparency was considered a sign of courage. Humans, with our inability to hide how we felt, were seen as profoundly brave. The louder the expression, the greater the compliment. Several listeners nodded solemnly. A scientist asked whether all humans were capable of this level of output. The translator began extrapolating population-wide averages before I could stop it. A diplomat quietly excused themselves, already drafting a memo. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a polished wall panel and barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who had survived an ordeal they hadn't signed up for and was now being congratulated for it. My embarrassment had crossed some invisible cultural line and come out the other side as prestige. The translator logs were requested. They appeared on the central display, time-stamped and annotated, each emotional spike neatly graphed. The crowd murmured as if attending a lecture. Terms like endurance, adaptability, and unexpected robustness floated through the air. Someone whispered that humans must have evolved on a very hostile world. I wanted to sink into the floor. Instead, I found myself being gently guided a few steps forward so a medic could perform a quick scan. The results came back normal. Elevated heart rate. Slight dehydration. No lasting damage. The translator announced this with a tone of impressed approval. The alien girl leaned in and thanked me again, her voice warm. She explained that participating with a human had been considered a bold choice among her peers. Humans had a reputation, she admitted, for being intense in unpredictable ways. She hadn't expected the station-wide attention, but she was pleased by it. Her social standing had increased dramatically in the last few minutes. I realized, dimly, that I had been promoted without my consent. The station commander arrived, drawn by the commotion. They assessed the situation with the weary competence of someone who had seen too many cultural incidents go sideways. After a brief consultation with the translator logs and several uncomfortable glances in my direction, they declared the matter resolved. No violations. No harm done. Just an unfortunate but enlightening software malfunction. They suggested, diplomatically, that the translator receive an immediate patch. The translator, still active, announced that it looked forward to future improvements. As the crowd dispersed, slowly, Reluctantly, I became aware of the looks being thrown my way. Not mocking. Not scandalized. Respectful. Curious. A few even seemed impressed. A being with 3 eyes gave me a small, reverent nod as they passed. I did not nod back. I was afraid of what the translator might make of it. The alien girl touched my arm lightly in farewell, a gesture that the translator mercifully did not amplify. She smiled again, softer this time, and told me she hoped we might exchange cultures again someday. In private. With updated software. I managed a weak smile in return. By the time I made it back to my quarters, my station comm had exploded with notifications. Messages from other humans asking what I'd done. Messages from non-humans asking what humans were. An official notice informing me that I had been listed as a reference case in the station's cultural database. I lay back on my bunk and stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the station returning to its usual, understated rhythm. Somewhere out there, the story was already changing. I had walked into a room expecting a quiet conversation. I had walked out as proof of concept. The next morning, the station felt different, and I couldn't tell if that was because something had changed or because I had. The corridors were the same width. The lights still hummed at the same barely audible frequency. Gravity behaved itself. And yet, every step I took came with the uncomfortable awareness that I was being noticed. Not stared at. Not gawked at. Not even whispered about, at least not obviously. It was subtler than that. Conversations paused just a fraction too late. Heads inclined in that thoughtful way I'd seen academics use when acknowledging a colleague. A few beings offered polite gestures of respect I had never received before. One even stepped aside to give me extra walking space, like I might need room to do whatever it was they now believed humans did. I kept my eyes forward and pretended this was normal. The station's public displays had been updated overnight. Where there had once been a generic advisory about emotional translation protocols, there was now a longer notice recommending reduced amplification thresholds when humans were present. The language was careful, respectful, and mildly terrified. Humans, it explained, exhibited highly expressive emotional feedback loops that could overwhelm communal systems if not properly managed. I stood there reading it longer than necessary, hoping no one would recognize me. Someone behind me cleared their throat, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The translator helpfully whispered that my reaction indicated residual sensitivity. I muted it immediately. Word travels fast on a station, especially when it doesn't need words. By the time I reached the dining hall, my reputation had already outrun me. A group of traders fell silent as I passed, then resumed their conversation in hushed tones that were somehow louder than normal speech. A pair of engineers debated whether the station's structural tolerances should be re-evaluated. I grabbed my tray and focused on not spilling anything, because I had a horrible feeling the translator would find a way to narrate that too. My comm pinged constantly. Messages from humans who had heard the rumors in increasingly distorted forms. According to one, I'd single-handedly redefined interspecies bonding. According to another, I'd triggered a station-wide emergency with nothing but human expressiveness. I did not correct them. I didn't have the energy. An official summons arrived just after breakfast. Not disciplinary. Informational. I was requested to attend a brief meeting with cultural liaison officers to provide context. That phrase would haunt me. The meeting room was larger than it needed to be, with chairs arranged in a respectful semicircle. The officers were polite, professional, and visibly curious. They thanked me for my participation, apologized for the malfunction, and then proceeded to ask questions that made it clear the malfunction had been the most educational accident in recent memory. They wanted to know how humans managed such emotional output without long-term harm. Whether it was learned or innate. If it varied by individual or environment. I answered as honestly as I could, emphasizing that embarrassment was not, in fact, a superpower. The translator, now operating under stricter limits, still managed to frame my answers in flattering ways. By the end of the meeting, I had been gently informed that I would be listed as an informal reference point. For future interactions. Not a spokesperson. Not an ambassador. Just an example. The most awkward kind of honor. As I left, I ran into her in the corridor. She looked rested, radiant, and completely unburdened by existential dread. She greeted me warmly, thanked me again, and casually mentioned that her social standing had improved significantly. Several peers had already asked her about humans, and she'd spoken very highly of me. I considered asking her not to, then realized it was far too late for that. She apologized for the inconvenience, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. In her culture, she explained, the exchange would be remembered fondly. A rare moment of shared honesty. She hoped I felt the same. I told her I would, eventually. Before we parted, she smiled and added that next time, she'd make sure the door settings were correct. I laughed despite myself. Quietly. The translator stayed mercifully silent. By the end of the cycle, the station had settled into a new equilibrium. The story had stopped being about me and started being about humans in general. Humans were now described as emotionally robust, unintentionally intimidating, and refreshingly sincere. Training materials were updated. Warnings were added. A few species expressed interest in learning from us, though preferably with sound dampening. I became background again, which was all I had ever wanted. Sometimes, though, I'd catch snippets of conversation, someone explaining to a newcomer why humans were classified the way they were, or why translator settings had special human-specific disclaimers. I'd keep walking, pretending I wasn't the footnote they were referencing. I never did fix the coffee machine. Some things are beyond even legendary endurance. But every now and then, when someone complained that humans were too loud, too emotional, too much, I found myself smiling. Because out there, among the stars, there was a station that had learned something important the hard way. Humans didn't shout to dominate. We just felt things honestly. And sometimes, the galaxy listened,